What was the last verse? Did we start the last section? Yeah, we did. And there was it one verse or what was there left? Hemalata. Can you call Hemalata and ask her? She's not here yet. Maybe she's not coming. Okay, devotees, Hare Krishna. We are having our 20th session on Bhakti Vaibhava, 20th session. And we are in chapter 5. We are somewhere at the end. She's not answering. Text what? No. Yeah, we're around. We did 33, which talks about curing a disease caused by milk with a milk product. We did that one. Anyone? Was it?
Yes.
Next one.
We ended that.
We did it. Oh, we did 35. Okay, so that means we are just about there. So, okay, chapter 5, verse 35, that's where we're starting. And let us first of all say our prayers. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachade Shatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Oh, we have to do 35. Right, yes, so we'll start with 35. Chapter 5, verse 35. And Arjuna Charan Prabhu, could you turn the volume on our speaker here down a little, please? It's just a bit on the high side. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 5, verse 35. Yes, right, we finished with 34, Purushottam Yoga. So, yeah, chapter 5, verse 35. Whatever work is done here in this life for the satisfaction of the mission of the Lord is called Bhakti Yoga, or transcendental loving service to the Lord. And what is called knowledge becomes a concomitant factor. Interesting. So this is, of course, Narada Muni instructing Vyas. He's giving instructions here. So let's see, what do we have here? We've got just the one paragraph of purport. Just one. Oh no. Anyway, let's go through the paragraph. So, yes. So Srila Prabhupada, as usual, explores different sort of popular views, common views amongst people who are sort of in the Vedic tradition to one degree or another. Can you just ask him to turn it down a bit? Yeah. So, some say, or the general and popular notion is that if we perform fruitive work as described in the scriptures, you get transcendental knowledge. But that's like saying that if you plant an apple seed, you get an orange tree, or something like that. You know, fruitive activity and devotional activity, they're just completely different categories. And they have different natures, okay? They have different natures. So you cannot get out of something material, you cannot get something spiritual. This is one of the just fundamental, one of the most fundamental teachings in Krishna consciousness. Yes. And indeed, you know, in the 10 offenses, you've got that to consider chanting Hare Krishna to be equal to Karmakandya, or be part of Karmakandya, or to interpret the Vedic literature, interpret Hare Krishna, draw a comparison between it and these other things. So anyway, it's one of those points Prabhupada talks about really frequently. So, all right. And then Prabhupada goes on to say that some think that Bhakti Yoga, Krishna consciousness, is another form of karma. But actually, Krishna consciousness is above karma and jnana, and it's independent. Prabhupada makes the point, I think, yes, he does. Bhakti Yoga is independent of jnana or karma, but jnana and karma are dependent on Bhakti Yoga. And therefore, in regard to Bhagavad Gita, our acharyas make the point that Bhakti Yoga, pure devotional service, is focused on in the middle section, the middle 6 chapters, chapter 7 to chapter 12. And the first 6, 1 to 6, they're focusing on yoga, yoga and karma. Karma, they're focusing on karma. And the last 6 are focusing more on jnana. But they're next to they're on either side of the section about bhakti because they need the strength given by the contact with bhakti. Otherwise, your attempt at karma will fail, and your attempt at jnana will fail. So, okay. So, yeah. So, Narada Muni here is recommending Kriya Yoga or Karma Yoga, or indirectly actually Bhakti Yoga, because the idea is that to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead, which in terms just a fruit of activity, just karma. You're trying to make material advancement. So the Lord, Prabhupada makes the point, the Lord wants his sons and his daughters and just everyone, the living beings, not to suffer the miseries of material life. He wants them to come back, but then you've got to become purified because we're all deeply infected materially. So work has to be done on behalf of the Lord, particularly Bhakti Yoga. Prabhupada is speaking, as he does sometimes in Bhagavad Gita in the 5th chapter, for example, he speaks of Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga as being sort of one, or at least having a very strong connection, or like overlap even, you could say. So Prabhupada explains like that for the rest of the purport, that any attempt at work without Bhakti Yoga, satisfying the Lord, won't help, and other knowledge devoid of Bhakti Yoga will not help. And Prabhupada concludes the purport, the conclusion is that a devotee engaged in the unalloyed service of the Lord, specifically in hearing and chanting of his transcendental glories, becomes simultaneously spiritually enlightened by the divine grace, as confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita. So, I want to again make the point, and I want you all to note this. Really at least note it in your minds or actually write it down. That Prabhupada, as we'll see, as we go verse by verse, chapter by chapter, tonight we're going into the 6th chapter, so we're moving through the Bhagavatam. But as we go and we look at every verse, every single verse, and every single purport, not in as much depth as we do in Srimad Bhagavatam classes, where normally we just focus on one verse, but, we may look at 5 or 6 or 10 even, or whatever, some multiple number. But please note that Srila Prabhupada regularly says that we must engage in devotional service, and specifically in hearing and chanting. Repeatedly. It's just repeatedly Prabhupada says that. It's just a really important point to note. Right, so we go on to 36 now. And here's the translation of 36. While performing duties according to the order of Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one constantly remembers him, his names and qualities. So there's a few paragraphs here. It's funny, I don't know how they do this when they put together the Bhagavatam. Sometimes you get a number of short paragraphs, like here we have a number of, not exactly short, but shortish, moderate to not so long paragraphs. In some places you get these long, just one long paragraph. Anyway, that's okay. So, all right, let's have a quick look at the purport, first paragraph. So Prabhupada begins by talking about the expert devotee molds his life. They mold their life so that while performing duties, either in this or the next life, they constantly remember the Lord's name, fame, qualities, etc. And remembering means chanting too. Yeah. And the Lord's order is there distinctly in Bhagavad Gita. One should work only for the Lord. Yes. What's that verse? That's chapter 9, verse 27. Yat karoshi yadashnasi yat jahosi dadasi yat tapasyasa yakuntaya tat kurushva mad arpanam. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer and give away, do it as an offering to me. So whatever you do, that's what Prabhupada's referring to here. The order of the Lord is distinctly there in Bhagavad Gita. To whatever you do, do it for Krishna. The Lord should always be situated as the proprietor. And Prabhupada makes the point, interesting point, in the sort of second half of the first paragraph. Even in demigod worship, according to the Vedic principles, the Supreme Lord Vishnu has to be invoked at first as the Yagyeshwara, the master, the controlling power of the sacrifice. And then they go into the worship or whatever, invocations and so on, to the particular demigod involved. Yes. And Prabhupada says, he concludes the paragraph, it's recommended that a particular demigod be worshipped for a particular purpose, but still the presence of Vishnu is compulsory in order to make the function proper. These are big points. Then the second paragraph, let's have a look here. So, Prabhupada makes the point that what to speak of like ritualistic functions, Vedic sacrifices or pujas or whatever they are, but even in our ordinary household affairs, business or professional activities, we should consider that the result must be given to the Lord. And Prabhupada now invokes chapter 5, verse, 29. 29. How does that go? Bhoktaram yagatapasam sarvalokameshwaram suridam sarvabhutanam gyatvam shantam richati. Yes, that he is the supreme enjoyer, the supreme proprietor, and the supreme friend. And no one else can claim that, truly. So this is the peace formula, of course. And so pure devotees, serious devotees, Prabhupada says, they remember this constantly. Krishna is there's basically nothing but Krishna in the center of everything. And as soon as something becomes detached from Krishna, that's Maya. And Prabhupada again, look at this. And in doing so, he repeats the transcendental name, fame, and qualities. Yes. So again, just in the next purport, Prabhupada emphasizes chanting. Yeah, to associate with the Lord. It's just such an important thing. Okay, so now the third paragraph. And Prabhupada makes quite a point here, that the major part of our income, not less than 50%, must be spent to carry out the order of Lord Krishna. So how's that? You're lucky you're not earning money. It might bankrupt you quickly. But this was discussed in the GBC body, has been discussed on a number of occasions. And I remember the last time it was because devotees who are working and trying to be devotees and not be extravagant and, live like simple living, high thinking, that sort of life. They're actually trying to. But they were finding they just couldn't earn enough money to give 50%. They would have had to have downgraded their lifestyles, like really down, to kind of slum existence or something like that. So the question was raised, and the GBC body at that time so far concluded that this means 50% after essential expenses. So then it becomes doable. But otherwise, some devotees, there have been devotees who are like successful business people and fanatical devotees, and they were giving 50% actually, and still living, very comfortably. But your average working, wage-earning person couldn't do it. So, okay, anyway. And Prabhupada goes on. We not only give profit of our earning, but we must actually preach. We should actually do it. We must also arrange to preach this cult to others, because it's one of the orders of the Lord. And Krishna says in the last chapter of Bhagavad Gita, two of the last verses, I think, 1868 and 69, that anyone who really preaches the glories of the Lord around the world, or, as much as they can at least, they really make the effort to get out there and preach to the people that there's no one more dear to him than such a devotee. Right. So like this. Prabhupada even says scientific discoveries can be used for preaching. It's Bhaktivedanta Institute. Yeah. So and Prabhupada's really emphasizing, therefore the attempt must go on to convert unwilling men and women to become his devotees. And Lord Chaitanya, of course, gave us the simple approach: chanting, dancing, and feasting. That's a good approach. And again, Prabhupada says 50% of our income can be spent for this. Yeah. And if only prominent people, leading people give 50%, it's going to make such a massive difference. Turn this hell of pandemonium which surrounds us here into the transcendental abode. chanting, dancing, and feasting, everyone will be happy. So, so this must go on. But the only thing is, Prabhupada makes a very important point, it's kind of somewhere in the middle of this paragraph, that, where is it here? The only condition for successfully executing such spiritual activities is that they must be conducted under the guidance of a pure devotee, free from mundane desires, fruitive activities, speculations. It has to be done in a proper Krishna-conscious way. So therefore we should, Prabhupada emphasized distributing books, Harinam in public, prasadam distribution. You must know that if you focus on these things, you are doing good. You are just doing the right thing, there's no doubt. Some other devotees, they come up with all sorts of fancy ideas how to preach, and you have to be careful. I mean, it's not impossible to think up some creative ways, but you got to be careful. And in a sense, it's safer. Distribute chanting, distribute books, distribute prasad. You must know you're doing the right thing. You can't go wrong. Right. So like this. And towards the end of the purport, important point, Prabhupada says, one can remain in his own position. No one has to change his position. The only condition is that you give up speculation, give up materialism, and submissively accept the orders of the Lord from the lips of a bona fide devotee. Right. So on to 37. And this is one of these purports. It's got all these short, very small, like one sentence paragraphs. I don't know why they do it. It's just really strange. So, okay, verse 37, let us all chant the glories of Vasudeva, along with his plenary portion expansions, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and Sankarshan. Okay, So, according to the Pancharatra, Narada Pancharatra, expansions come from Narayan. Actually, of course, they come from Krishna via Balaram, but then they come via Narayan. So you get all these different, there's some expansions mentioned there. And as Prabhupada says, these four, they're known as the four aides de camp of Lord Sri Krishna, Srila Prabhupada. Being creative there, aides de camp, interesting term. Assistants, basically. I mean, just in regular speak. So then there's a Vedic hymn, important mantra, beginning with Om Namo Dhimahi, etc. Actually, that it's probably, with Dhimahi, it's some type of Gayatri Mantra. There are many different types of Gayatri Mantras, actually. There are many different types of Gayatri Mantras and sort of mantras derived from Gayatri, and that's one apparently. And so the purport is, in the third paragraph, Prabhupada says the purport is that any transaction fruit of work, empiric philosophy, which is not aimed at realization of the Lord, is useless. Again, Prabhupada, he's used on Friday, I think the term was worthless. Now it's useless. It means that actually has no use. It's not just that it's not so useful as something else. It's just out the window. Gone. Yes. So therefore Narada has explained his own experience, and he's going to explain further, as we'll see, his own experience with devotional service. Yeah. And his own experience, and in the form of his own gradual development. Not just experience this or that, different experiences, but his experience in the gradual development of Krishna consciousness more and more. Okay. And Prabhupada, yeah, of course, it culminates in prema, pure devotional service, which is full of rasa. But Prabhupada puts a point in here, such at the end of the second or third paragraph, that such devotional service is also executed in mixed forms, mixed with fruit of work or empiric philosophical speculations. So then Prabhupada, in the fourth and last paragraph, the question which they've raised, what? No? Okay. Regarding which was raised by Shonaka, regarding the confidential part of Suta's achievement, is explained herein by the chanting of this hymn. Yeah, okay. They're referring to, Prabhupada's referring to the actual verse 37. It's a mantra. Let's just have a quick look at it, at the Sanskrit. Yeah, if you look at the mantra, the Sanskrit of verse 37, you'll see it's got dhimahi in it. So it's at least a type of Gayatri Mantra, or a relative of a Gayatri Mantra. It's not such a strict Gayatri Mantra that only second initiated people can chant it. So as Prabhupada said in the second paragraph, this, meaning the verse itself, is a Vedic mantra. It's actually a type of Gayatri mantra, or relative of a Gayatri mantra. And it should be chanted. It should be chanted. And as Prabhupada explains, it's addressed to the four deities, as were mentioned, Vasudeva, Pradyumna, Sankarsana, and Aniruddha, is addressed to them. But the central figure is Krishna himself, because the plenary portions are his aides de camp. Yeah. Yes. Vasudeva, Pradyumna, Aniruddha, and Sankarsana. They're all expansions from Krishna. Yeah. So the confidential part of the instruction, most confidential, is that one should always chant and remember the glories of Lord Sri Krishna, along with his expansions. So that's nice. And again, third purport in a row, you must chant. You got to chant. So on to verse 38. Let's have a look at 38. Thus, he is the actual seer who worships in the form of transcendental sound representation the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, who has no material form. So again, chanting. Yes. So our senses, looking at the purport, paragraph 1, our senses are material, and therefore they can't really perceive the transcendental form of the Lord, at least, or anything really transcendental. Our material senses can't really realize, but he can be worshipped by sound representation. And it's very important. Anything which is beyond the scope of experience by our imperfect senses can be realized fully by the sound representation. Yes. And Prabhupada gives a material example, but it's a good one, that someone transmitting sound from a distant place can be experienced, here, although they're transmitting sound from far away. Like we're transmitting sound here from Radharanath Temple, and people are hearing it on the other side of the world in so many places. So if this is materially possible, why not spiritually? And it's not just a vague impersonal experience. It's actual experience of Krishna. So therefore we should chant. We should chant regularly. And even we should just chant as much as possible. And it will increase and increase our transcendental realization. So, in the second paragraph, there's a discussion about murti. Murti, of course, we're familiar with the term murti, I think, most of us at least. We use it, it's used to mean deity. But it also has a second meaning of difficulty, apparently. Yeah. Form and difficulty. Therefore, amurtikam, the term amurtikam, which appears in the verse in the Sanskrit, means without difficulty. Without difficulty. So, the spiritual form of the Lord can be experienced by our spiritual senses, which can be revived by chanting. Yeah. So it's just, isn't it? Isn't it just again and again and again chanting? It's just, it's just so much. Chanting and chanting and chanting. So if you're chanting 16 rounds or more, you must know you're doing the right thing. But then Prabhupada gives a warning, a little further down this paragraph, that sound, you must receive it from the bona fide spiritual master, and you must practice it by the direction of the spiritual master. This will bring you closer to the Lord. And this is what's recommended in the Pancharatra. Yes. And basically without that, down towards the end of the purport, Prabhupada says, without that, you can't approach the Lord. Yeah. So Pancharatra is more important than Vedanta for this age. Right. So on to verse 39. Just 2 more verses in this chapter. O Brahman, thus by the Supreme Lord Krishna, I was endowed first with the transcendental knowledge of the Lord, as inculcated in the confidential parts of the Vedas, then with the spiritual opulences, and then with his intimate, loving service. So there's just one paragraph here of substance. So, and again, Prabhupada makes this point. Communion with the Lord by transmission of transcendental sound is non-different from Lord Krishna, the whole of Lord Krishna. It's completely perfect. And by this, preferably done without the 10 offenses, Prabhupada says, you can rise above the material plane and come to understand not just the essence of Vedic literature, but the Lord's existence, the Lord himself. And then, it happens sometimes at least. It doesn't happen all the time, but as Prabhupada says kind of in the middle of the purport, that the devotee is then endowed with mystic opulences, the 8 mystic opulences. But by that time, the devotee is so inspired with devotional service that the devotee doesn't bother with the 8 mystic opulences, mystic powers. Yeah. Because above all, the devotee is accepted in the confidential entourage of the Lord and is entrusted with specific service of the Lord through the agency of the spiritual master. And this is more interesting than the mystical powers. That's quite something, isn't it? Yeah. So Narada's explaining all this by his personal experience. And if we perfect the chanting process, we'll also experience the same things. Okay, and I think it's finally, if I'm not mistaken, verse 40. Finally, for this 5th chapter, or unless there's another chapter. So verse 40, please therefore describe the Almighty Lord's activities, which you've learnt by your vast knowledge of the Vedas. And again, this is Narada appealing to Vyasadeva. Describe the Lord. Describe his activities, which you have learnt in the course of developing Vedic knowledge, because that will satisfy the hankerings of learned people. And for common people, it will not just help them, but it will free them from the miseries of material life. And there's no other way. There's no other way than this sound vibration. So, yes, again, in the purport in the first paragraph, Srila Prabhupada emphasizes that Narada Muni has the experience, and he therefore asserts that the prime solution for all the problems of material life is to broadcast the glories of the Lord. And he talks about the 4 types of pious men mentioned in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, who may surrender to the Lord, or who do begin to surrender often. Those who are in difficulty, those who need money, those who are advanced in knowledge, and those who are inquisitive. Yes. So those four, they're good candidates. That's the basic idea. They're good candidates for becoming devotees and really taking shelter of the Lord. They don't always do that, but they often try to, or seriously consider it, or something like that. So then in the following paragraph, Prabhupada lists out, also from the 7th chapter, the four impious people, bad men, he says, who don't surrender. They're anti-Krishna. Those who are just like fruitive workers, the mudhas, just simple workers. Those who are like heavy materialists, like some politicians. What? Heavy materialists. And some who have got some knowledge, but it's not knowledge of the Lord. They're intellectuals, but they talk about the law, the material world and material relationships and whatnot. And then number 4, there's the atheists, asuram bhavam, those who have the asura bhava, which means, bhava in this context means nature, the nature of the atheists. And so here's the last paragraph, I'll just read it. Sri Naradaji advised Vyasadeva to describe the glories of the Lord, just to do good to all 8 classes of men, both good and bad. Srimad Bhagavatam, therefore, is not meant for any particular class of men or sect. It's for sincere people who actually want their real benefit and peace of mind. So that's nice. That's really nice. That's the 5th chapter, devotees. And now we'll go on to the 6th and just get straight into it. 6th chapter is titled Conversation Between Narada and Vyas. And basically, more than anything really, more than anything at least, Narada talks about his further experiences as a child. Yeah. And finally, not just as a child, but how he becomes the great sage Narada Muni. But essentially, he talks about his further experiences. Okay, and let's just have a look here. There are 5 sections. First section, verse 1 to verse 4. It's just further discussion about Narada's activities in his previous life. Then from verse 5 to verse 14, what happened after the sages left? Any of you who are doing Bhakti Shastra, you should note this. Verse 1 to verse 4, further about Narada's activities in his previous life. Then second section, what happened after the sages left? Because as he was describing in the previous chapter, he was there, he was serving the sages, and they were still there at home. But then they left, and things really developed. That's from verse 5 to verse 14. What happened after the sages left? Then verse 15 to verse 26, devotees, it's about Narada Muni has darshan of the Lord. Can you believe it? He actually sees the Supreme Lord. Verse 15 to verse 26. Narada has darshan of the Lord. And then section D, the fourth section, verse 27 to verse 36. Narada leaves his body, the body of the child. Narada leaves his body and becomes Narada in his next life. So Narada leaves his body and becomes Narada. Or I said, to avoid confusion, he leaves his body and becomes the great sage Narada. That's from verse 27 to verse 36. He leaves his body and becomes the great sage Narada Muni. Verse 27 to verse 36. And then finally, section E, fifth section, Narada takes leave of Vyasa and carries on his way. Yeah. Verse 37 and verse 38. All right. So, devotees, the first section then is verses 1 to 4, and I am going to read the translations. I am going to read the translations. Verse 1, Sutta said, O Brahmins, thus hearing, so this is Narada's activities in his previous life, verses 1 to 4. Sutta said, O Brahmins, thus hearing all about Sri Narada's birth and activities, Vyasadeva, the incarnation of God and son of Satyavati, inquired as follows. Verse 2, Sri Vyasadeva said, what did you, Narada, do after the departure of the great sages who had instructed you in scientific transcendental knowledge before the beginning of your present birth? Please, everyone, bear this in mind. When Narada was the son of a maidservant, it was a different lifetime. He was not Narada Muni. It's not that he grew up and became a great devotee and he became Narada Muni. They certainly grew up and became a great devotee, but then he passed away. And then, in the next life, by the Lord's arrangement, he got his special transcendental body and then he became Narada. Right. Wait a minute. Yeah, okay, so that was verse 2. Verse 3. O son of Brahma, how did you pass your life after initiation? And how did you attain this body, having quit your old one in due course? And verse 4. O great sage, time annihilates everything in due course. So how is it that this subject matter, which happened prior to this day of Brahma, not only was it a previous lifetime, it was right at the end of the previous day of Brahma. Yeah. So how is it that this subject matter, which happened prior to this day of Brahma, is still fresh in your memory, undisturbed by time? Excellent question. Right, so there we go, devotees. Let's go back through these things. Sutta said, O Brahmins, thus hearing all about Sri Narada's birth and activities, Vyasadeva, the incarnation of God and son of Satyavati, inquired as follows. So, just basic in the purport, there's just looks like 2-sentence purport, very short. The point is, Vyasadeva is inquisitive. How did you go from being the son of the maidservant, even though you're a good boy, you're a nice boy, you served the sages, they blessed you and you took their remnants and so on. But how did you actually become Narada Muni? Yeah. Did you just join ISKCON and, gradually become a GBC member and then you became Narada Muni? No. There's a lot more to it than that. So Vyas wants to know. And as Prabhupada says, in this chapter, Narada Ji will describe how he was able to have a brief audience with the Lord while he was absorbed in the transcendental thought of separation from the Lord. And when that separation was very painful. Okay, and verse 2, Sri Vyasadeva said, what did you, Narada, do after the departure of the great sages who'd instructed you in scientific transcendental knowledge before the beginning of your present birth? Yeah, before the beginning of your present birth. So again, there's a short purport. So Vyasa is his disciple. So of course the disciple is interested to know what all about, like the biography of the spiritual master. So he wants to know, what did Narada do as the child, son of the maidservant, after initiation? Of course, an interesting point, I'll just mention it here. There's no mention of an initiation ceremony or being given a name or anything. It's just the contact he had. It stimulated him. And as far as is mentioned, that is taken to be his initiation. So he wanted to know what Narada did to be as a little child, but then to become perfect, because he wants to become perfect himself. So he's inquiring from the spiritual master, which is an essential factor in the progressive path. And this inquiring is called technically Saddharma Pracha. I think it literally means preaching eternal Dharma, something like that. So, okay. Verse 3. Sri Vyasadev's, where are we? Verse 3, sorry. O son of Brahma, how did you pass your life after initiation? And how did you attain this body, having quit your old one in due course? Right, so another short purport. And it's very important, Prabhupada makes the point. How did an ordinary maidservant's son become so transformed that he got a spiritual body as Narada Muni. And Vyasadeva, of course, he wants to know for himself, but he feels that everyone should know. It's just very interesting and extremely valuable information. And verse 4, O great sage, time annihilates everything in due course. So how is it that this subject matter, which happened prior to this day of Brahma, is still fresh in your memory, undisturbed by time? An excellent question. And because as I mentioned, it's not, certainly it's not that he just became a devotee by the influence of the sages, and then became an advanced devotee, and then became Narada Muni in one lifetime. It's not even that, he's initiated by the sages, and so he spent the rest of that life as a devotee, and in his next life, just like immediate next life, he became Narada Muni. But there's a whole, as the verse says, all these things being described now happened prior to this day of Brahma. Yeah. And as we go through during the course of this week at least, we'll see Narada explains what happened between him and the Lord and Lord Brahma, and how he became Narada Muni. Right, yes. So yeah. So how is it all, the memory of this, still fresh in your memory, undisturbed by time? So Prabhupada makes the point that as spirit, the soul, is not annihilated after the material body is, so the spiritual consciousness is also not annihilated. So Narada developed good Krishna consciousness, very good Krishna consciousness in that lifetime as the son of the maidservant, in the previous Kalpa, day of Brahma. And it stayed with him right through into the next day of Brahma. And Prabhupada makes interesting point. This is something we should note. Consciousness of the material body means spiritual consciousness expressed through the medium of a material body, because consciousness is spiritual. So in a sense, there's not exactly something called material consciousness, not exactly. Like you got spiritual consciousness, and then over here you've got material consciousness, and they're just two phenomena. No. Consciousness is spiritual, but when we call it material consciousness, it's influenced by matter. It's influenced. And it's also covered to different degrees, meaning in terms of how deeply conditioned the soul is. Like a tree is living and consciousness is there. But the tree, the consciousness is so covered that you can't really detect the consciousness. You get these certain flowers, sunflowers, they turn as the sun passes during the day. They turn. And we would say that's consciousness. Materialists would say it's just, some mechanical thing following the heat. But it's consciousness, but it's more covered than our consciousness. They can't even speak anything. They can't even make any sound. So this consciousness then is destructible, is inferior, destructible and perverted. But superconsciousness of the supramind in the spiritual plane is as good as the spirit soul and is never annihilated. Right, okay, we go into the second section, which is, because this here now, Vyasa is questioning Narada, these 4 verses. Now from verse 5, Narada is going to respond. Right. So this section's from verse 5 to verse 14. You know what I think I'll do? I think I'll just read through the verses and then maybe we'll just call it quits for this evening. Let's see. So verse 5, Sri Narada said, the great sages who had imparted spiritual knowledge of transcendence to me departed for other places, and I had to pass my life in this way. So if you remember what we read last week, how Narada as a child, previous life, interacted with the sages, served them, listened to them, and by their permission took their remnants. In the course of all that, some form of initiation took place. Maybe it was a formal initiation. It's not mentioned, so we can't really say one way or the other. But, it may well not have been like a very, what we call initiation. I don't know. So anyway, they moved on and he carried on. Verse 6, I was the only son of my mother, who was not only a simple woman, but a maidservant as well. Since I was her only offspring, she had no other alternative for protection. She bound me with the tie of affection. And verse 7, she wanted to look after my maintenance properly, but because she was not independent, she was not able to do anything for me. The world is under the full control of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, everyone is like a wooden doll in the hands of a puppet master. Verse 8, when I was a mere child of 5 years, I lived in a Brahmin school. I was dependent on my mother's affection and had no experience of different lands. Verse 9, now it starts really developing. Once upon a time, my poor mother, when going out one night to milk a cow, was bitten on the leg by a serpent, influenced by supreme time. Verse 10, I took this as the special mercy of the Lord, who always desires benediction for his devotees. And so thinking, I started for the north. He just left. He's 5 years old. Just left home. But he's so Krishna conscious, he took it as the mercy of the Lord. You can imagine your average 5-year-old, the mother dies in front of them by the bite of a snake. Whoa. My gosh. Right, okay, verse 11. After my departure, I passed through many flourishing metropolises, towns, villages, animal farms, mines, agricultural lands, valleys, flower gardens, nursery gardens, and natural forests. 12. I passed through hills and mountains full of reservoirs of various minerals like gold, silver, and copper, and through tracts of land with reservoirs of water filled with beautiful lotus flowers fit for the denizens of heaven, decorated with bewildered bees and singing birds. Verse 13. I then passed alone through many forests of rushes, bamboo, reeds, sharp grass, weeds, and caves, which were very difficult to go through alone. I visited deep, dark, and dangerously fearful forests, which were the play yards of snakes, owls, and jackals. Verse 14, and this is the last verse here. Thus traveling, I felt tired, both bodily and mentally, and I was both thirsty and hungry. So I took a bath in a river lake and also drank water. By contacting water, I got relief from my exhaustion. So actually there's a couple of minutes left, but I think we'll just call it a night, and we'll continue tomorrow, going through in more detail these verses and the purposes, at least where there are, the purports, at least where they are, because there's not every verse at least has one. Okay. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.